am audible as well as the screen is visible to everyone. Is it right? Am I audible?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you. Yes. Dear all, emotional intelligence was popularized by this best-selling book by Daniel Goleman, which was published in the year 1995. Today, all of us sitting here would would have at least heard about emotional intelligence, and largely that is attributed to the popularity of this book. However, we all know that emotional intelligence is important, but to know that in detail, to analyze what exactly it entails, that sort of a very detailed program I haven't come across. So here is our humble attempt to go through the pages of this book and know it better and in more depth. And before we get into it, let me make a confession. Please don't take me as an expert in psychology or in emotional intelligence. Whatever I tell you, please note that that is not the last word on emotional intelligence. Feel free to stop me and correct me in between. In this workshop, we will have about 10 minutes for question answers. And also in between the session, if you feel that there is an essential need to correct me, please do so. Otherwise, we can take all the question and answers in that dedicated time. And there are a few guests who have joined from different parts of the world. Thank you all for joining and for this encouragement, and very much looking forward to your feedback as to how to improve this series. Let us now go to understand what is the importance of emotional intelligence. This was covered a little bit in our last session, but today there are some more guests, so for their benefit, let us go through it once again because it's very important. Thing is that when we were all in school, our teachers and parents would have all told us that the one and only thing we need to do is to study well and score high marks. And we have some of us, or at least we made an attempt to practice what they told us, and we tried to study well, and we have passed out from school and colleges. But now when we go back to a school or college for reunions, we will have one particular experience. We will find that it is not the most studious person who has become the most successful in life. And it's a universal experience. It happens everywhere in the world. Why? Our education system is largely designed around the concept of IQ, that is intelligence quotient. That it depends a lot on arithmetic skills, problem solving skills, or word comprehension. And studies have shown that at best, it serves to predict a person's future success in only a few narrow areas, like in academics or in research. In all other fields, like in becoming an entrepreneur, being a very good professional like an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer, in all those areas, being a salesman, in all those things, IQ is not the best predictor. There is some other factors. What are they? Effect of IQ in determining overall success in life is estimated about approximately 20%. And the bad news is that there is no single factor that explains the majority of the remaining 80%. The remaining 80%, there are a lot of things contributing to it, like luck, parental education, family's economic background, the economic situation of the country, and of course, emotional intelligence as well. But there is nothing single factor that takes about 40% or 50% of the success in life. In that case, what is such a big importance about emotional intelligence? That would be a question. That importance has come out of another field of study that's called competency mapping. What it shows is that IQ has a floor effect. It means in a group of people who are roughly at the same level of IQ or knowledge, in that group, certain people might achieve extraordinary success and others, most of them will remain at an average level or just above average level, and some of them might fall behind. And this variation in a population of people who have largely the same level of education and IQ, what contributes to that variation when it is studied in detail, it comes out that it is indeed emotional factors that explain about 80% of that variation in success. This comes out of competency mapping. What competency mapping is, it is done by people who are like recruiters or HR professional. What they do is, they will, when they want to recruit a person for a critical role, they will find out a person who has been an extraordinary performer in that particular role earlier. They will map out their characteristics and competence, and then they will find someone else who has performed at an average level or below average level in that same role. They will map out that person's competence and characteristics as well. When they compare these two, that gives them a clear indication about what are the characteristics that made a person a superstar performer in that role. And when this kind of studies are done, in almost 80% of the cases, it jumps out of the data that it is emotional factors that make people to become extraordinarily successful in vast areas, vast fields, or in various professions, in a group of similarly skilled or from a group of people of similar IQ or educational level. So what it shows is IQ is a threshold quality. It gains us an entry into a field, but once we are in there, from there, the success and progression, it is largely determined by emotional intelligence. This is the importance of emotional intelligence. And Daniel Goleman, in his own words, he had to wait until 1995 to write about emotional intelligence in a scientific manner, because until that time, science had very little understanding about emotions, how emotions happen, how the anatomical wiring is there in the brain that activate emotional triggers and all. Those things science was able to comprehend only after advanced brain imaging techniques came into being. And that happened towards the second half of the 20th century. And that's the reason this book got published only in 1995. It is a relatively recent frontier of science. And here the attempt now is to go through that book and try to understand emotional intelligence in a scientific manner. That is the objective of this 10 workshop series. Let us get into the introduction or the preface of that book. This is the quote that book starts with. It is from Aristotle. Aristotle lived about 2000 years ago. And this is what Aristotle had to say about one particular emotion that is called anger. Aristotle says anyone can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose and the right way, this is not easy. Aristotle said that 2000 years ago. I think everyone will agree that anger is an essential emotion. We cannot say that anger is absolutely an evil thing or a bad thing to have, because there are certain instances where one is very much justified or very necessary for one to become angry. Like when we hear about the Nirbhaya incident in Delhi, at that time our blood boils. It has to happen. If it doesn't, that is something wrong. On the other hand, if there is another person who becomes angry all the time, even for the most trivial reason, like a Facebook post or for a WhatsApp post, someone becomes angry and commits violent crimes, that is bad. That is emotional immaturity. Between these two extremes, one is when somebody becomes very much angry even for the silliest of reason, and the other end, it is someone who doesn't become angry at all, even for the most genuine and serious reason. Both those things are bad, but in between there is a place where it is just the right thing to be angry to the right degree. But where exactly that place or that point lies, Aristotle didn't know that in 2000 years ago. Now, after in the 2000 years after Aristotle, we have progressed so much in the science, so much in technology. Are we better off? Let us take a look at the headlines in our newspapers. It says, domestic violence is on the rise. There are riots in Delhi, in the US, in Sweden. Sweden is supposed to be one of the happiest places on the world. There are riots in Sweden. Suicide is increasing. It looks like we are as incompetent in handling anger even today as Aristotle found human race 2000 years ago. Making things worse, there are certain other trends in the present day society. Earlier, we used to live in joint families. There was matriarch or patriarch who used to keep the emotional outburst of the members in check. But now we live in nuclear families. Both the spouses are earning members. No one is dependent on the other for financial sustenance. And not surprisingly, divorce rates are increasing. And depression among children is increasing. And there is the recent phenomenon of social media. Social media algorithms, like in Facebook, they are designed to be addictive. What they do is they will put into a newsfeed only those things that we like, and that's kind of an echo chamber effect. We, unknowing to ourselves, we acquire identity to certain narrow groups, and after that, any different opinion or a disagreement from someone else, that makes us feeling irritated about it. As a result, there is increased polarization and hatred among communities across the world. This is something proven. So, in this senseless situation, how to make sense? Perhaps the answer lies in being emotionally intelligent. Human beings are said to be emotional beings. Take a look at our classics like Ramayana, Mahabharata, Iliad, and all. They are popular even now, very interesting and very important for us all. What are they? They are intense emotional stories. Ramayana, Sita, a woman is kidnapped, that is followed by a war. Mahabharata, Draupadi is humiliated, followed by a war. Iliad, Helen elopes with someone, followed by a war. There is love, there is anger, there is honor, there is, war. It is an intense, all those things are intense emotional stories, and we are drawn to emotional stories naturally. That is in our nature. But what science had to say about human beings until recently? The best model science had about the human mind up to the second half of last century was that of a computer. A computer is unperturbed by emotions. Computer makes calculations and gives results irrespective of what would be the emotional consequences of it. Computer cannot be aware of emotions. And the best model science had to propose for a person was to be so cold-hearted, rational being, but we are not that way. That is not in our nature. Take, for example, if you want to take a dress from a textile shop, if you want to wear a red color shirt or a blue color shirt or a yellow color or a green color shirt, can we make a rational, logical decision of that? We cannot. What we do instead is we go by our feelings. Feelings are nothing but emotions. That means we make day by day, moment by moment, we are guided by our emotions, and science had no clues about emotions until very recently. But now, science has advanced and there are advanced brain imaging techniques. And as a result of it, there is better clarity about how emotions happen and also how emotions control our behaviors. And Daniel Goleman did a great job of consolidating it all and publishing through this book. And that's what we are going to understand. Our attempt will be to understand that in the coming session. That is, scientific awareness of emotion and the ability to manage them would help us make sense out of the senselessness that we see in the newspaper headlines. Now, before we get into the actual content of the book, let us understand certain basic things. First question is, what are emotions? And the definition Daniel Goleman has given is that an emotion is a feeling and its distinctive thoughts, psychological and biological states, and range of propensities to act. Let us keep it very simple. If we understand that emotions are just the same as feelings, that is good enough for us to understand this book. That is what I understood after going through that, but I could well be wrong. And you are free to correct me. Next, if somebody asks how many emotions are there in the world, there is no answer to that because there are thousands of different variants of emotions. But certain core emotions were discovered by Mr. Paul Ekman. What he did is he showed pictures like this to populations around the world and asked them to identify the emotions. And all the populations around the world were able to accurately identify these emotions. That populations include even pre-literate people who are not exposed to TV or cinema. So for them, it was clear that this expression represents anger and this stands for happiness and all. So that led to a conclusion that emotions are not dependent on culture. Irrespective of the language, gender, region, or race, or all sort, irrespective of all sort of differences, human beings across the world identify these emotions accurately. And that gave rise to the concept of core emotions. But there are more emotions than these six. For example, what is the emotion of jealousy? Jealousy is supposed to be a combination of anger and fear. And even for anger, there are so many different variants like fury, outrage, resentment, and so many. And that is true with all other emotions. So there is no clear consensus as to how many emotions are there or what are the different families of emotions. Or at least that is what this book says. And emotions are inbuilt in our psyche, like we are born with it. For a child, when it is born, there is no need for some of us to teach it to be sad or to cry or to be happy. The child by itself starts laughing, and by about 15 days or after about 30 days or 60 days or so, and also as soon as it is born, a child cries. So we are born with it. Next is how emotions evolved. It is said that our species appeared on the face of Earth about 200,000 years ago, or someone say about 170,000 years ago. And in that more than 170,000 years of existence on this Earth, almost 90% of the time, we encountered harsh environments. Like new infants survived into childhood, very few survived into childhood. Predators could kill us any moment. Droughts and floods caused starvation and death. In that kind of situations, emotional triggers were a survival mechanism. A person in the wild, when he or she hears a rustle in the surroundings, that person who could immediately sense danger and bolt to safety would have survived and produced offsprings. On the other hand, for someone who was not emotionally so sensitive, would have remained there and tried to scan the horizon to see whether it was indeed something dangerous, and by that time would have ended up in the belly of a tiger or a lion, and those souls wouldn't have got the chance to procreate, and it would not be their children who would have inherited the earth. That means we are all the children of those human beings who had that emotional triggers very active. And the fact is that we inherit it and we still possess that. But our environment has changed dramatically. In the past 50 years or so, we live in cities and we are not in the threat of predators, but still those emotions, they do not go away because in the past 50 years our lifestyle has changed. Evolutionary time scale is much longer than 50 years or 500 years. Therefore, that type of hair trigger anger still remain with us, and in the present day surroundings, it leads to catastrophic consequences. As we read about tragic school shootings in the US, for students or children of about 13 years of age, automatic weapons are in ready reach, and a child occasionally lose control of its emotions, and the result is so tragic. And that is the background about emotions. And let us see how this book is structured and how we will structure this program as well. This book is divided into 5 parts. The first part is about the emotional brain, that is about the neuroanatomical structure of the brain and how emotional triggers occur. And we will cover that in the next session. Today there is only 30 minutes, so we will, after this structure, we will get into the question and answer session. And the second part is about the nature of emotional intelligence. That will be very interesting. That will help us understand the 5 components of emotional intelligence. That will give us emotional self-awareness. That will be very, very helpful, and that will help us. That is at least that is the expectation. And the third part is emotional intelligence applied. That is how to apply emotional intelligence to preserve relationship, on the job success, to protect our health and well-being and all. That also is going to be very useful and interesting. And next, part 4 is about windows of opportunity. That is about the right time to impart emotional lessons. And part 5 is on emotional literacy. That is actually how to conduct that types of trainings on emotional intelligence. And so that is how the structure is. So in the next session, we will go through this first part, that is the emotional brain. And with that, the introduction to emotional intelligence we are covering